Welcome to the Binge Worthy Podcast series. I am your host, Nate. I'll be your host tonight. This is the second season of the Binge Worthy Podcast series. If you missed the first one, please don't hesitate to join us and watch the whole series. Binge watch it, if you will. You can go to the Artist Exchanges YouTube channel, and you can watch the whole series, the first season of the Binge Worthy Podcast series there. We had some pretty interesting themes, myself and George G. Oliver. We had some great conversations on some really new films and TV shows and some old TV shows and movies. And this whole podcast series was put together because I wanted to spotlight a lot of Black film, TV shows, actors and actresses, and playwrights and screenwriters and directors that get a lot of shine, that don't get a lot of shine. And I really wanted us to be in a space where we were able to have constructive conversations about what we do best. And that's I'm an actor, so I love watching other actors do what they do. And this series isn't about what you should watch and what you shouldn't watch, what's good and what isn't good, but more so the things that interest me throughout this pandemic that we've all been for almost a year now, which is crazy. Next month it'll be a year that we've been under this quarantine and COVID-19 crisis. And throughout this COVID quarantine period, I got to watch a lot of things that I didn't necessarily have time for before. And I stumbled on a lot of great TV, a lot of great films that I often wanted to watch but couldn't watch, and things that were new and not so new. And I began to have these conversations, but on my other radio show, the Artist Exchange radio show, and with other friends. And many people was like, well, we should go live and we should talk about this. So out of that came the Binge Worthy podcast series. And you'll meet a lot of those people that I had those conversations with this season. We'll have a lot more guest hosts that will stop by. And if you're tuned in, thank you for tuning in. Please take a moment and like, share, subscribe this podcast. It is this a passion project that I have that I wanted to talk to everybody about, and I wanted to just expose. This season, you'll also see some independent films being added to our roster. I want to talk to independent filmmakers, not just the big blockbusters or the popular ones, but I want to expose all types of film and TV shows and plays. We're going to add plays on this season as well. But today is a special occasion. We have a special dedication tribute that I wanted to do today. If you did not know, Miss Cicely Tyson, one of our iconic actors, very prolific. She passed away last Thursday, and I had the season planned, and I kind of worked some things around because I couldn't let 1 February go by or the opening of this podcast go by without mentioning her. So why not do a special tribute to her? And I'll be going over a couple films. If you see at the bottom of the screen, you can see a number of films that you knew about her, that you've seen her in, and probably some things that you haven't seen her in. And I'm really excited about how people have rallied around, and it's been very positive. And death is not for human consumption. It's always going to be a bitter bite, and it's always going to catch us off guard. But to live to be 96 years old and die of natural causes, it says a lot about someone's life and how they spent their life and how they lived their life. And her being a public figure, we have plenty of interviews to be able to go back and watch of hers. I have a couple clips that I was going to share today, and I am excited about how all this came to be. So to start the show off, I wanted to do a special presentation on her. Is it one of her last interviews that she had that she did so I wanted to share that with you so we can get just a general idea of who she was and all that. So stay locked in, don't go anywhere. Feel free to comment and leave your messages as we're going on. So without further ado, I'm going to start the clip now.
Whenever I'm offered a script, what I'm interested in when I get it is why me? Who was that character and why did they want me to play it? And when I get to the point where I feel like her skin has fitted my arm or my mind, then I know there's something about her.
As a little girl, what were your dreams?
I was a very shy child. If you got 15 minutes of words out of me, you got plenty. I was a thinker. I sucked this finger until I was 12 years old. That's why I have these buck teeth.
Born in 1924 to West Indian parents, Cicely Tyson recounts her extraordinary life in her new memoir, Just As I Am.
I am an observer of human nature and the dreamer of audacious dreams.
The journey to stardom was not an easy one for Tyson, who became pregnant when she was 17 and had a short marriage that lasted just over 2 years. Tyson began her acting career as a single mother, a choice that brought conflict at home. Weren't you surprised, Cicely, that your mother actually kicked you out of the house because you wanted to be an actress?
Oh, she told me I couldn't live there and do that. Suddenly I found something that I loved to do, and I had a child to support.
So you weren't thinking, when I grow up, I want to be an actress?
No, my mother, I don't know what she wanted me to be. She thought that I was going to live in the den of iniquity because we grew up in the slums, okay? Lots of prostitutes walking up and down the street. And that's all she knew about movies.
Her mother eventually came around, and their connection is a strong one to this day, especially in this church.
And I feel that her spirit is here. And so I bought this pew in her name.
So this was a way to honor her.
That's right.
Tyson made her on-screen debut at 31 in the 1956 film Care of Gold. Shortly after that, she enrolled in an acting school run by Paul Mann, a well-known acting coach. She found herself alone with him after her first class, and she writes about a traumatic encounter.
He said, "Excuse me, Miss Tyson, I'd like to talk to you." So I turned around and came back, and before I knew it, he pulled me down.
And he was touching you and groping?
Yes. No, what he wanted me to do was something worse than that. I thought about the whole incident when I got home. And, I never shed a tear about that until this moment.
All these years later, it still affects you that way.
The whole thought that you could go out innocently to achieve something, and it turns out to be something so vulgar and coarse and demeaning to you as a young Black woman. But I made up my mind then that I went there for a reason, and that reason had not changed.
It sounds like a Me Too incident before we were even calling it Me Too. And some people would say, but why did you go back? And to that you say,
I went back to get what I was told I needed in order to achieve what I wanted. And I think of the many young Black women who go through that and are devastated by it, and it kills their dream. I was not going to let that happen to me.
Through her sheer determination, her talent blossomed and landed Tyson the headlining role of Rebecca in Sounder.
You got your low-life job, Mr. Sheriff.
A 1972 film about a Black sharecropper family.
Bye, Daddy.
Bye, son.
And a conversation with a white journalist about the movie pushed Tyson to find new purpose in her calling. And so you're promoting Sounder. Now, a reporter said to you
that he felt a bit of bigotry in himself while he was watching the movie. When I asked him why so, he said, I was uncomfortable about your older son referring to his father as daddy. I said, do you have children? What do they call you? He said, they call me daddy. And I thought, my God, this man is thinking that we're not human beings. And I made up my mind that I could not afford the luxury of just being an actress, and that I would use my career as my platform.
namely, you want Black people to be seen as human beings.
That's right.
After playing over 100 roles on the stage and screen, Tyson has won 3 Emmys, a Tony, and an Oscar.
This is the culmination of all those years of have and have-nots.
But beyond her public success, her memoir documents her love story with jazz icon Miles Davis. They were married for 7 years, but their romance spanned decades. Friends always wondered, why in the world are you with Miles Davis? Because you're right. He was unfaithful.
Mm-hmm.
He was abusive.
Mm-hmm.
You said Miles needed to be saved from himself, and you needed someone to save.
Well, listen, people who hurt, it's always the person that is closest to them that they hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in love with him. He was a beautiful human being.
But you know what? On his deathbed, he wanted you to know that he was
sorry. Tell Cicely I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. Was he the love of your life?
Yes.
Was he? But did you think you could never find love like that again?
I haven't.
You haven't. Have you been looking?
No.
I'll ask you this. What does it feel like to be 96 and a legend, Miss Legend?
I'm amazed every single day I
Do you feel like you have more to do?
live. Yes, that's why I'm still here. I mean, what my life became is not what I expected. I had no idea that I would touch anybody.
When the time comes, what do you want us to remember about you?
I've done my best. That's all.
Oh, she gives me chills. I just adore her. She really is royalty to me. And it was so I could have talked to her all afternoon.
Hey, what's up, and welcome back. That was the last interview with the late, great, iconic Cicely Tyson. I don't know what you can say about a person that you've never met, but you have admired their work. I have admired her work. I remember watching a lot of her films with my great grandmother, and just being at awe as somebody who could just take command of a moment and do it so effortlessly. As you know, as a male, where if you are an acting student, you are often given by your directors and your teachers directions to go find someone comparable to yourself. And I always would include material or content or just her in general, because her work, it speaks to the woman's experience, to mothers, so on and so forth. But a lot of her her dialogue in plays, her monologues in movies and in plays and such, are so universal. They're so timeless, and anybody can recite a lot of them. Um, she has something that's very specific to the woman's experience that, of course, I wouldn't dare try to touch them, but I've used plenty of her monologues and her dialogue in classes that I've taken and classes that I've taught. Um, I and as I said before, quoting a playwright I know, Latonya Valencia Moss, um, death is not for human consumption. Nobody wants to eat from that drink from that bitter cup of sorrow. And we don't know the time, we don't know the place, we don't know the hour, but it is with a heavy heart that I even do this tribute. And I already had a couple of her movies included in this season, and me thinking about and kind of putting into pen to paper and deciding what films and what TV shows that I wanted to talk about. And we talked about her last season, in our first season as well. But I wanted to open up this first season in the middle of, or the beginning rather, of Black History Month, with this tribute. And I'm not as prolific as many of these journalists have been. We're simply going to go through and talk about a number of her films and a number of her contributions in film and television, and one of her plays that we're going to discuss as well. But just a little bit of information on how we do things here on Binge Worthy Podcast. Again, I'll say to you, we don't films are it's not about liking or disliking or what's good or what's bad, or we're going to give you three thumbs down. It's more so discussing the social, the cultural, and the historical impact that these films, these actors, these directors, these playwrights had on us as people of color, and just, people in general. um, as I decided which um as I decided and went through which one of her pieces I wanted to talk about, I started picking out my favorites, and some of my favorites aren't necessarily her, her most popular work. And I discovered pieces of hers, and I've been watching for the last this over the weekend a number of her movies that people don't even remember her doing, and she starred alongside a lot of phenomenal leading men actors. We have one of our films that we're going to talk about this evening, where she co-starred alongside Richard Pryor. So it was a comedic piece. People didn't know how funny she was, how dedicated she was to her craft in terms of everything. She had did a little stand-up before. She's been in plays and movies and TV shows. We recently saw a resurgence of her career. Not that she went anywhere, but we saw her in a resurgence of her career with Tyler Perry, who lifted her up and gave her roses while she was still alive. So shout out to Tyler Perry and individuals like Tyler Perry, who really lifted her up, and made her her legacy shine in the latter part of her life. And I speak about her the same way I spoke about my grandmother when she passed, and my great grandmother when she passed, because she felt like she belonged to all of us. Everybody knew or had at least one Cicely Tyson movie that they loved. I first was introduced to her with Roots. That was the first time I had seen her on a screen, and I went to went to the not to the movies, but that was a TV series, and watching her and the first series, the first part of the series, playing Kunta Kinte's mother, and I noticed her, but we didn't see her in the rest of the film. But she left a mark. So the next film that I saw, I watched it, and the next one, and the next, I would watch her, and it appeared that she was playing the same type of characters but it really I'm trying to. They all had a reason, and in listening to a lot of her interviews, um, listening to a lot of her interviews, she was very purposeful towards the characters that she played. She didn't want to play anything that made her look bad as a black woman, as a mother, uh, as a black person. And all of her movies had a profound uh, moment in them, and it had a meaning and a purpose behind it. And it was something that for myself, I adapted. In terms of me being a theater actor, I didn't want to play anything that did not mean something to me. You know, at least three of her movies, um, she broke a barrier in the story itself. One of the first ones that I really wanted to talk about, one of my favorites, um, and I think this is one that she's known for the most, is her role in the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman. Um, After Roots, this was the very next one that I got to see. Um, and I didn't necessarily as a child follow her career, but as I became an actor in my teens, I began to follow her. And this was the next film that I got to watch. This was comparable to her Roots because they had the same type of storytelling, but this movie, and I just watched it again this morning, um, and it's one of those movies where if you have the time to spend 2 hours to get into the storytelling, she's a great storyteller, and I love how all of her characters she got into it. She got Miss Cicely Tyson had a bad, not a bad, I wouldn't say it's a bad reputation, but she had a reputation for playing older women, so much so that it kind of overlapped her aging. So by the time she got to the age of the woman that she had been played, we had already gotten used to seeing her as an older woman. So I think her legacy was portraying these older, wiser women. The autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman, she played the character of Jane Pittman, and it was amazing watching her, like the movements. This woman lived to be 110, and the movements, the subtlety of the character that she built it was amazing to watch it. And I found myself even today watching um, the movie Miss Jane Pittman, still being amazed at how well she committed to the character, how well she uh the delivered. And I saw some behind the scenes, a couple behind the scenes clips of the making of this movie, and how um much she had to go through in terms of putting on the prosthetics and the makeup, and the cast as they aged. um there's one scene in this movie that gets me every single time, and it's the her first husband, um when he was trying to break in that wild horse, and she attempted to let the horse go. She had found out from a palm breeder that he was going to die at the hands of this horse, and she tried to let the horse go. She successfully did it, but he caught her and ran after him, and ultimately you see the scene where he comes back and he's being dragged uh, by that horse. And it gets me every single time. Her emotions, her command of her emotions, and everything she's ever played gets me. This movie specifically allows the audience to um, uh, kind of study life, from the endings of slavery all the way up to the beginnings of segregation. This film covers, and is one of my favorites from her, um, because we see her first as this older woman, but I love it was one of the only films that I've ever seen from her where her storytelling, her ability as an actress to be a storyteller was the most prominent. Tell me what you think. Are you a fan of the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman? It's one of her biopics that stands out to me because it just I mean just her transformation um in terms of the physical character, um the way she clenched her lips when she talked, the way she got into the character, and ultimately my favorite scene was her I guess desegregating, because you don't see the flip side of that story. um the water fountain. She was the first one in our town to drink from this water fountain. And this story starts out with her, slavery ending and her deciding to go off on her own. We learn how she got her name. Um, we learn how uh, we learn her beginnings as a slave, a young girl who then carries on in life and suffers a lot of losses, and it becomes a theme throughout a lot of her other movies, um, playing that matriarchal character. So I love it. I really love it. This is one of my favorites from her. Even though Roots, I love Roots, but she had such a small pivotal moment in that movie, as his mother in the very beginning of that long series of Roots. But the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman was my favorite. I love storytelling, and this movie gave me just that. So I'm gonna move on from this one, and I'm gonna go to um actually the one that I talked about first. So I kind of combined Roots and um, the Jane Pittman story. But as I said, the first um, the first movie that I saw her in was Roots, and it it was such an epic production. Roots was. And I remember it coming on TV and everybody being so like enthralled in this, and it was like watching the soap operas, but it had such a brutal and violent depiction of slavery. And I remember Cicely Tyson's character, who played his mother in the beginning, and it kind of, for me, it kind of stamped my love for her, playing those matriarchal characters. I was born and raised around women, and a grandmother and a great grandmother. So that kind of matriarchal love that Cicely Tyson carried throughout her whole career is something that made me love her. So Roots was definitely one of those films that um, allowed me to see her as um, uh, a powerful vessel, and I understood acting in a way that was um, storytelling, uh, historical storytelling, and that responsibility we have to tell our own stories. So Roots, she played a very pivotal role as the mother of the 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 main character, but it kind of opened the door for me to really love and respect who she was. So that was Roots. I didn't want to, kind of combine the Miss Jane Pittman with that one. Um, one of my new favorites from her, and I had never seen this film until I think I just watched that. It was Bustin Loose. It was her co-starring alongside. It was in the 70s, and her co-starring alongside Richard Pryor. Um, Richard Pryor is known to be this kind of R-rated comedian, and he's had moments where he was able to show kind of his range somewhat as a serious actor. And Bustin' Loose was definitely a comedy. uh Richard Pryor character was this like criminal that was always getting into trouble, always running schemes and scams. And this opportunity, um he came across to kind of get himself out of trouble. And this he took this job with the character that Cicely Tyson played, which I have to say, if you watch this movie, she sounds different. She is more upright and more serious. This was the first time where I didn't hear Cicely Tyson's voice in her acting. Um, I liken Cicely Tyson to one Angela Bassett because they became the queens of biopic films. But as Denzel Washington. I compare her a little bit to Denzel Washington because often, and James L. Jones, because they are voice actors, so you normally hear their voice in the characters that they play. And this was the first time that I did not hear Cicely Tyson's voice. She really was very meticulous with even the way she sound. She was a very well-to-do woman who came across this uh, group of children. There was 8 children that she now put herself in charge of, and she wanted to help get out of the situation that they were in. It was the film was very funny. It them going to her, I want to say her aunt's farm, and it becomes about their journey with the 8 kids, her and Richard Pryor's character getting this group of children on a bus and traveling down to her family member's farm, and the journey that they go on getting these children who were foster kids and from all different backgrounds, troubled children. Um, and you see her play this. Um, not, I don't believe any of her characters were ever docile because she was always a strong black woman. But you see her play off of Richard Pryor, and it's the most unlikeliest of co-stars and leading roles for them two to be cast in with each other. I would have never thought to put them two together, but it has been said in many people who have known her that she had a great sense of humor. Uh, but this film is definitely a film that I think you should watch. It's a kids friendly ish movie, and it's a great way to uh, kind of watch a little history with a little satire along each other. I've really enjoyed just watching her be the straight man in this comedy. It really, I love watching Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor, in my opinion, was a great actor, and I think people kind of overlooked it. And I think when you're a comedian, like a Whoopi Goldberg or like I don't think Eddie Murphy has had any serious roles yet. But it was a great duo movie. It was great seeing it, and the children were definitely a part of the story. But it was really about the relationship that blossomed between Richard Pryor and Cicely Tyson. They it I don't it was my first time watching it, and I think I have to watch it again to really get the crust of the story because I was watching, you know, and I'll tell you, it's hard for me to watch a film, especially for the first time, and not look at those types of things and not look at um that type of anything beyond the story. I'm looking at the movement, the characterization, the subtleties, the continuity from, scene to scene. And this was my first time seeing it because I went through her catalog of her filmography of things that she had done. And when I saw Richard Pryor, it was like, duh, let me watch this. And it really, it was interesting watching the two of them play off of each other, um, and her seriousness rubbing off on him, and his kind of slapstick and humorous acting style rubbing off on her. And I think it's a great film for you all to watch, and 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 enjoy actually. So this film was called Bustin Loose, and it was a film. I believe this was done in the late 70s. So definitely take a look at it. A lot of these films that I was able to see, you can watch it on YouTube. And honestly, I don't feel bad about watching these films off of YouTube. Many people have a issue with watching it. Now, new films, I do buy the film, but a lot of her films they're not on any of the streaming networks. You can't really find them. But I was able to find this on Amazon and as well as YouTube. And you can rent it or buy it outright on both YouTube and Amazon. So check those out. So we've talked about the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman. We've talked a little bit about Roots. Roots is I'm trying to not necessarily skip over it, but um, I wanted to kind of touch that in a different series. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and probably like about 4 more episodes. We'll talk a little bit about Roots. Um, so we have Sounder. Sounder was another one of those movies. Um, a hold on, I'm trying to pull it up now. Uh, this movie was a I want to say it was set in the South, Louisiana, in like the early 1930s, um, and it took place in that sharecropping world. A, a couple of Cicely Tyson movies kind of overlap that same early 1900s to mid 1900 range. And in this one, she plays the wife of a sharecropper. There's a sharecropper family, and the husband is arrested and is left to her and her children to farm this land. Um, and if you know anything about sharecropping, you know that was a way that the racist South uh, continued slavery. For many sharecroppers who did not eventually get to own their land, and most sharecroppers uh, were renting out a portion of land or staying on the property of an ex-slave owner or a wealthy plantation owner, uh, one and the same most times. And they were help either whatever the crop was for that farm or that land, or whatever the business was for that land. They would partake in it, and we see in this one they were sharecropping vegetable, and I think it was cotton as well. And it really it showed just how hard it was. It showed how cutthroat it was. It showed how despicable the process of being a sharecropper was, because they would offer the land to the ex-slaves or the blacks, and in return they would allow them to live there and raise whatever crops they could or whatever, and contribute to the overall economy of that plantation. But they will always be in some form of debt, somehow, some way. We saw in the Jane Pittman story, it was the same thing with her and her first husband. It was always some level of debt that those sharecroppers stayed in and was in. And we hear many accounts of sharecroppers never being able to repay the debt, because if the God forbid if the crop went bad, or it didn't harvest as much as they would have wanted to, or they didn't get to harvest as much as they needed to, they would be in debt the next planting season. So it was just a continuous cycle of just debt and almost, servitude. It was another form of servitude and slavery. And this movie Sounder uh carries on that theme of servitude, sharecropping, in the early 1930s. And Sounder is the dog, and it is a whole relationship with the son and the dog, and somehow the dog gets away from the family, and after the husband is put into jail, it also shows you another side of how black women were treated, because in this movie, Cicely Tyson's character tries to go and see the husband while he was arrested, and for allegedly stealing from the plantation owner. And uh, she isn't allowed to go visit him in jail, but their younger son then um, goes to see him, is allowed to go see him in jail. And it was only certain times of the year that they were able to see each other. And then when the dad went from the jail to a prison, and it was a big controversy on them not allowing people to know where prisoners were being sent, for fear that they would help them break out. The son finds out, with the help of one of the white neighbors, one of the women that the mother worked for, helped them to find the location of the dad. The son then goes to find the dad and stumbles on a school, and he begins to go to school. So we see the despair, the kind of the how black schools were against white schools. When I say the themes of many of Cicely Tyson's movies really depicts, and it's not, I don't want to say it's the same story, but it is a different face and a different experience and a different perspective on many of what we went through in the Jim Crow era. This movie particularly talks about that pre Jim Crow era, post slavery era, that early 1900s era where we were sharecroppers, um, mainly, and it was more farming uh, uh, work for us. And it just, many of her movies just leave you in a bad mood. Ultimately, in this story, the family unit comes back together. They were able to save the crop that season and have a windfall. And none of her movies end on a bad note. But the time periods, a lot of her pieces are period pieces. Now they are, and they speak to just how far we've come, what the struggle was. And this movie Sounder is, um, you see a more emotional driven Cicely Tyson. You also see that idea of what happens when the dad is taken out of the household. That whole idea, um, uh, and I just one of I always dreamt of interviewing her and listening to a lot of the interviews that she's done over the years and why she chose a lot of these similar stories, and the significance to her versus because she was born in New York. So this whole farming lifestyle wasn't what she was. And she actually became an actress and not a, worker, so to speak. But I'm very curious and I'm looking for more and more interviews of her. Um, what did she mentally go through? Because I know getting into a character this heavy, um, with these types of heavy stories, rather, I'm wondering what is that like for actors that have to be in these heavy type of roles consistently. And not all of her movies were slave or sharecropper movies, but a good chunk of them were, and a good chunk of her movies, it was never, she never got the dynasty roles or she had movies where I'm thinking about a couple like the Women of Brewster Place. She played the mother to uh the actress name escapes me at this moment. But the Women of Brewster Place, which we're also going to talk about in a couple more, and actually in our Women's History Month, she played a kind of a wealthier woman, but in most of her movies, she wasn't a wealthy person. She didn't play those types of characters as much. I can probably think of maybe 2 or 3 movies where she played that type of character. But most of her characters, if she wasn't a single mom struggling or the wife of, it was always a hard struggle that she had to deal with. And Sounder was more so racially charged, like the Jane Pittman story, like Roots. Well, not more so Roots, because Roots she played the queen of that tribe. But in these last few movies, it was hard watching her play these roles because I just wondered mentally where she was. She speaks a lot about her relationship with God as Cicely Tyson, her the human being. She talks a lot about just letting God guide her throughout her career and her having this sense of responsibility for telling our story in such a raw and gritty way. And Sounder, like the Jane Pittman story, was very gritty, very raw, and you see a very emotional, driven actress emerge from this. The story was very well done. And I'm one of them people, I can watch 1,000,001 different slave type narratives and get a totally different feel from all of them. I don't feel like it's the same story. Um, but I'm very curious as to where she was with it. Please feel free to leave your comments if you have any questions, if you want to comment about any of the stories that we're talking about. We've gone through the first couple ones. We first talked about the Jane Pittman story, one of my favorites. One of the first movies outside of Roots that I got to see her in a full length movie. And then we talked a little bit about Roots, the very iconic Root. I think Roots. I think everybody has seen that at least once. I suggest that as you grow. So I remember seeing it twice as a young child. I watched it in school, the whole series in school once. I remember as a teenager, I saw it twice. In my 20s, I think I saw it once. Now in my 30s, this is the third time that I watched Roots. I watched the Roots in preparing for this show today, and it hits different the older you get. So Roots now at the age of 37 is a lot different than when I watched it when I was actually 7. I know more obviously, but you see things that you don't. Every time you watch Roots, you're going to notice something or a different scene that you didn't see before. And we just finished talking about Bustin Loose. That was her role with the very funny but yet very talented Richard Pryor. She plays a very well-to-do woman who wants to save these 8 children from foster care, and she ends up being able to take care of them. They're all living on this farm with her aunt, and they are being taken care of. They save the farm, and you just see this budding relationship between her and Richard Pryor. The film is very funny, very comical. So I would really just take a look at it. It's very funny. Jane Pittman is something that I think most people have seen. I think Roots is something that most people have seen. I don't think many people have probably seen um, Bustin' Loose. Sounder was one of her first, um, I believe, award nominations. And she definitely did a great job in Sounder. I liked her acting and storytelling in the Jane Pittman story, but Sounder, I think uh, her emotional range was much better. Um, so that was Sounder. So we watched the first 4. The River Niger. Um, she was a. This was a. And what I'll say about a lot of films that Cicely Tyson is in, um, and many black films, I think up until like maybe the last 20 years, will always, they all the black films from like the 90s and behind that, that preceded the 90s, were always packed with black characters. And you would see all of these characters that were younger now, that we know as these iconic and legendary characters, um, get a chance to really, you get a chance to see where a lot of them started from. So a lot of her early movies, you had James Earl Jones and Lou Gossett and all of these characters that really stood out. I'm uh the River Niger. I had all this lined up and then I just lost it. But this film was amazing for many different reasons, because you didn't see a lot of it coming. It was directed by Krishna Shah. Um, it stars Cicely Tyson, James Earl Jones, Lou Gossett Jr., Glenn Truman, who played her son, Jonelle Allen, Roger E. Mosley, Ralph Wilcox, Teddy Wilson. And it was a story. It wasn't necessarily a coming of age story, but it was. She plays the mother in this. You don't really see her. She kind of pokes her head out throughout all of it. And when her husband James L. Jones uh, dies towards the end, you see her character kind of emerge. Um, this is one of the first films that I see her with an ailment, and how she kind of portrayed that she had cancer in this film. And we see her, as many black women do, just try to muscle through it and deal with it. And a lot of these films from, I say, like the 70s and the 60s, they have such um, strong connections to the time period that they were being made in. And sometimes the characters get lost in the story. And this was one of those movies where the characters, these are great actors that we see at very young ages, but they kind of get lost in the story. There was some gang violence that was involved in this. You see kind of the early rumblings of gang violence and such. And You see a mother just trying to save and keep together her family. James Earl Jones plays her husband. He's a drunk, so she's trying to keep him in line. Her mother um, is a part of this, and that's Jonelle Allen plays her mother, and it's just it was a lot going on in the story. It was a lot going on, and it was a lot is a lot of characters that we could have kind of streamlined. And this is when I kind of get into the editing of it, but it was a lot going on. So historically, it really told the story of just where families ended up. The son was kind of a vet that had a lot of regrets, that saw how black men were treated while in war and how they were treated once they came home. The father was kind of the hardworking patriarchal figure that was also a drunk. You see the mother trying to keep everything together, and tragically, something happens to her, but she becomes the one that becomes kind of the matriarch of the story, and she takes charge and gets everything back in order and keeps it going. But it was just a lot going on in this film. It was good, it was a cool movie to watch, but it wasn't one of my favorite movies. And she's not really um the star of the movie. So it was a lot. You see James L. Jones kind of uh, be the powerful force, him and Lou Gossett. But it's not my favorite. It's not my favorite. Um, it wasn't my favorite film from her. I watched it because it was one of the ones. It was just the casting of it seemed interesting to me, but I didn't really enjoy it, to be perfectly honest. But watch it. Things that interest me are more technical things, but it was too much going on. It was too many. Um, it wasn't so much. It was too many storylines going on, but it was too many people, and it was going in some interesting ways. Um, yeah, it wasn't my favorite. I'm gonna skip down to, so we've done Sounder, Jane Pittman. Um, One of the interesting finds that I found, and I think this is the last one of all of them. One of the interesting um, stories that I saw from her was a Trip to Bountiful. Now, this was a remake. This was an adaptation, rather, of a 1980s movie that was made, and she did a tremendous job. Um, and I got to see this as a play, and I was just taken aback by her ability to. And I think she was in her late 80s or early 90s when she did this. This was just a few years ago um, that she did this. And the story Trip to Bountiful is the story of an older woman who wants to go back home for the last time. Um, she has been living with her children, and she decides that she wants to go back home, and she just goes on her own and ends up back at her home place. There was an interesting interview on Cicely Tyson about this movie where she went back to the town in which this movie was set in, where the writer actually was from, and she sees the town that he wrote about, and he talks about his family and his this story of this woman who was hell bent on um, returning back home. Um, and it was an interesting story, but I'm gonna let us hear a little bit of it.
buying the world back in those days. I remember remarking that to my papa, and he said, the world can't be bought. Didn't rightly understand what he meant then.
It's 2 words.
Cicely Tyson.
She's amazing.
Powerhouse. Masterful at what she does. Icon.
A goddess. Inspiration.
Gives me chills every night. She's heaven.
Well, I'd seen an African-American production regionally, and I thought, we should try to go to Broadway. And I called Michael Wilson, our director, and I said, if I can get to Cicely Tyson, do you think we can make this happen? And he said, yes.
Watching Cicely play Mother Carey Watts must have been what it was like watching Lauren Taylor do The Glass Menagerie.
She's always been a source of just of warmth, and just she embraces everybody.
She's amazing. I'll follow her wherever she goes.
Sometimes I have to say to myself and my God, how did I deserve this? And why did I deserve it?
She's crazy.
Why do you talk like that? You know Mama. Mama isn't crazy.
Vanessa Williams is knocking out the park. Blair Underwood did a superb job with the role. I mean, the entire cast was really phenomenal.
I don't know what's the matter with y'all. I never had any trouble sleeping in my life. I guess I have a clear conscience.
It feels great to be back up there. It feels energized and spirited in a different way because it's new energy and new cast and a new environment. But there's also something very familiar because it's an old family that we've kind of slipped right into.
With Vanessa, you find chemistry with someone. I said to her the other day, we should have been doing this 30 years ago, playing husband and wife. It's because it's nice when you find that on stage.
Journey Smollett Bell, oh my gosh, making an auspicious stage debut tonight.
I learned something new about storytelling and about humanity and about acting when I'm with her in a scene.
I mean, when I first saw the play, I was very moved by the story and by the characters and the relationships.
It is inspiration served up on a silver platter.
You want to see iconic performances. That's why you want to come and you want to see a beautiful production and a beautiful play. I mean, we're really, really fortunate in Los Angeles to have this production.
Watching Cicely Tyson live, the only thing that I can compare it to is watching Felicia Rashad live, and watching someone of her age take command of a live stage is amazing to me. And I'm somebody who I didn't kind of grow up, but in my adulthood, I was introduced to community theater. And you get to see these caliber of women performing on those stages. And so it was only natural for me to fall in love with her all over again, watching her in this production of the Trip to Bountiful. Her timing, her voice, her character, her demeanor, the way she... I only can compare it to what I've seen in community theater. I was kind of groomed as an actor in my 20s with these phenomenal older women who were powerful on a community theater stage. And I've seen it, face to face, right, in my presence. So me getting to watch Cicely Tyson on a stage, if you've never seen a live play in any sort, whether it be in a high school or college or a community theater or on an equity stage or Broadway, go see a play. And I know right now we're still in lockdown, but that is one of the things that I miss. I love these virtual productions that we're getting to do. I'm loving these movies and TV shows, but I miss live theater. I miss watching it. I miss being a stage crew. I miss being a director. I miss being an actor. I got to do a production right before this closed, and it's nothing like live theater. And in me wanting to kind of just show my respect and my love for Cicely Tyson, I just remember her being, and she had to be in like her late 80s, early 90s when she did this role, and they traveled with this. So theater takes stamina, to make a film, and I believe even TV is a little bit tougher than even film is, but with film, you can take a break, and do a French scene or do a beat and cut and maybe do that a couple different takes so that becomes the work that's in it. But stage, first of all, you have a couple months of rehearsal or a month or so of rehearsal, and then you're live and you're on it. You can't fake it on stage. People find the sweet pockets to kind of move them through it, but you can't fake how you feel. If you're having a bad night, you got to figure out how to turn that bad mood into some character some character choices. Um, and the great thing about theater is that you get to play to an audience, and however long the run is, and God willing, you get a long run of something, because then you get to take a journey beyond just a weekend or a one nighter. But me getting to watch, I've seen tons of her films. I've seen her on TV, and she's amazing. But to watch someone her age, and I keep bringing that up because, memorizing lines is tough for a 20-year-old. So imagine how sharp your mind has to be in your early 90s to have it, and just to, and I've only ever seen a few people on stage kind of have that spark at her age. They're great actors at all ages, but to watch her, and she was playing alongside two very talented, Vanessa Williams and Blair Underwood, and also Journey Smollett, the young lady, new actress, but well, she's not that new, but Jesse Smollett's sister, and we've seen her in a couple different TV shows last year. But watching her at the center of that wonderful cast is just amazing. Blair Underwood plays her son. Vanessa Williams plays her daughter-in-law. And watching, they had a great chemistry. I would have loved to watch them in something else, in a movie maybe. Um, but that was the last and only play I've ever seen her in. She has done Broadway before, she's done plays before, but she was primarily a movie actress. She moved into film with series like Roots, and she did a lot of guest spots on many popular TV shows. Again, we saw how her career towards the last couple years, she did a few of Tyler Perry's movies. We just saw her in The Fall of Grace. Um, I mean, I'm lost for words, but there's so many things that I want to say. Uh, One of the things that pop into my mind, because I was raised by a great grandmother: give people their roses while they can still smell them. And I think Cicely Tyson's life was an example of that. Many people loved her and embraced her. We saw how Barack Obama, one of his last um, rights as a president, was giving her the Congressional Medal of Honor. Like, it just so much that um, we saw. If you wasn't a fan of hers, if you were you saw, but you knew who Cicely Tyson was, and whether you liked her movies or not, there was still um, an undeniable range in who she was. And I am very proud to have been someone who got to see her and got to follow her career and even see that last play production, theater production that she was in. That really was the icing on the cake for me, being able to see her live. Um, and her career is an example of what this podcast is. Um, she was very rooted in her culture. Um, if you did not know, her family was from the West Indies. She grew up in New York. She was very much so steeped in her culture as a black woman, and she made a strong effort to her last days to telling her story, telling the story of these characters that she was blessed to be a part of. Her wisdom will live beyond, far beyond any of us that are still here right now. Um, when people who I admire pass, it does hit you like it's a loved one. Um, but this one was when I liken this to when my great grandmother passed away. It was very sad when it happened, but when someone lives that long and displays that much grace and elegance, you can't be sad. Like you couldn't be. And how befitting it opened us up to Black History Month in 2021, and a year into, almost a year into a pandemic. Um, just speechless. Um, I think her career speaks for itself. I think her talent, her wisdom that she has left behind speaks for herself. And when we speak about that dash, it's been something that maybe I have to figure out how to play with that a little bit more. But that dash between birth and death, it's just a dash. And we look at, tombstones and we just see that dash. And we don't know what often, we don't know the full extent of that dash in a person's life. That was a person's life. That is a person's life. Um, but on a creative side, I've never been able to meet her personally, but on a creative side, I can already see that dash overflowing with talent, with grace, with dignity, with class, with just compassion. Um, the Binge-worthy podcast series, again, I'll say we are here to spotlight the cultural, social, and historical impact of Black film, Black uh, performers, Black writers, and Cicely Tyson embodies all of that. And me catching up on a lot of her work and preparing for today, these were just 6 pieces um, that represented who she was, and it doesn't tip the iceberg. These 6 pieces. There were tons of films that I still watched, been watching all weekend long, that I've watched that wasn't included in this. And I didn't do I picked a couple of my favorites, but I picked pieces that gave strong characters, that had strong characters, that showed her in many different facets. Many of her pieces, she played mothers. Um, she wasn't an actor that that had so much vanity that she could not invoke emotion and show emotion and live in it. Like she wasn't afraid to get sweaty and ugly and in a character. I can only imagine knowing her personally. My heart goes out to her family. Many of the other performers that were touched by her and got to work with her. I know it feels like a piece is missing, but I began to think about, and I actually dreamt about my grandmother last night. Probably because I watched so many of Cicely Tyson's movies, and it made me miss my grandmother and my great grandmother, but it has given me a sense of self that is beyond measure. So, with this premiere episode of the podcast, the Binge Worthy podcast series, I just want to thank everybody who supported us last season, for our first season, and please continue tuning in. Please continue watching, and stay tuned. There'll be more surprises, more special guests, more films, more TV shows. Support this. At this point, it's not even about what's new, but this when you see something you like, share it. When you have the time, dig into those YouTube crates and find something new. Or many of the different streaming networks are now including content from years ago, not just the popular works. But bring some of these older movies out, show them to your children, your nieces, your nephews, and share it with them, because a lot of these things are being lost on us. It was films that I didn't know. There were still films of hers that I didn't know. She's done over 100 TV shows, movies, and films and plays to date. So there's plenty of material just on her that we can watch, and a lot of that will showcase that sprinkle that throughout this season. But I wanted to give my love and my compassion to her on this premiere episode of the Binge Worthy podcast series. So thank you for tuning in. Please like, please share, please subscribe. Again, I'll put up the thing so people know where to go to. And thank you. And you'll see the Artist Exchange Radio Show on YouTube. Go to that. You can like, share, subscribe to it so you get the notification bell whenever we have a new episode. We have a new episode that comes out every Tuesday. It will come out at 3 p.m. This was a special premiere night, so I did it a little bit later. So stay tuned, stay locked in, and peace out, people. Again, much love, much respect to Miss Cicely Tyson.